My friends, as we gather together in this moment of stillness, let us pause long enough to recognize that every step on this spiritual path begins with a single, simple question, one that very few have ever truly asked. And that question is, who is the I that is living your life? All day long we speak that little word, I am tired, I am afraid, I am lonely, I am seeking, and never once do we turn inward to discover what it is that utters this sacred name. And because we have not known, we have lived under an illusion so subtle, so persistent, that it has shaped every prayer, every hope, every sorrow we have ever carried. You see, the great misunderstanding of the ages is that the I you have been referring to is the person who was born on a certain date, who has a certain name, who carries a personal history, who bears wounds and memories and fears. We have assumed that this changing, thinking, struggling self is the one speaking when we say I am, but that has never been the truth of your being. That I, the one that trembles and worries and strives, has never been the self that God knows. Tonight, we are not here to add another belief, nor to adorn the human mind with new spiritual theories. We are here for one purpose only, to return to that original revelation that thundered from the burning bush, I am that I am, and to discover that this name, this identity, this presence is the very core of your own being. The I that hears these words is not the limited creature of flesh and thought. It is the infinite, eternal, ever-present life that has never been born and will never die. And so I ask you, quietly and simply, to listen not with the intellect that argues, nor with the emotions that react, but with that inner capacity that recognizes truth when it touches the heart. For the truth you will hear in this hour is not new. It is as ancient as God himself. Yet it is new to the one who has lived by the false I and has not yet awakened to the I am at the center of all being. Let us begin, then, by acknowledging that everything you have believed about yourself, your limitations, your fears, your struggles has arisen from this fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of I. And let us gently open the way for a deeper realization to dawn that the true I of you is not separate from God, not apart from God, but is the very expression of God's own being, here and now. Now let us look more closely at this little sense of I with which the world has lived for centuries, and let us see it for what it is, not to condemn it, not to battle it, but to understand it, because understanding is the first light that breaks the spell. From the moment we awaken, in the morning, this human I begins its chatter. I must do this. I must protect that. I must achieve. I must defend. I must improve. And at night it lies down with the same burdens, still believing that it carries the weight of life upon its shoulders. It identifies itself as a body that aches, as a mind that thinks, as a personality that fears rejection and seeks approval. It says, I was hurt by this person. I'm worried about tomorrow. I must find a way through this difficulty. And because we have accepted this voice without examination, we have treated this anxious, restless, ever-changing creature as our true identity. But this I is not the self that God created. It is a mask, a temporary appearance, a role taken on for a moment in time. It is nothing more than the accumulation of memories, reactions, conditioning, and beliefs, none of which have anything to do with the eternal nature of your being. This human I is always afraid because it believes it is separate from God, separate from supply, separate from health, separate from love. separate from safety. It believes it must make its own way in a hostile world, must struggle for place, must compete for survival, must acquire enough of this world's goods to feel secure, and because it sees itself as alone, it prays as a beggar, reaching outward to an imagined God in the sky, pleading for help, bargaining for mercy. My friends, nearly the entire religious life of humanity has been built upon this false center, a personal I seeking a distant God. And as long as prayer begins with a misunderstanding of who I is, the prayer cannot rise above fear. The human I prays from lack, from fear, from desperation, and then wonders why its prayers seem unanswered. But hear this clearly. The human I, the ego sense, the personal self, has never been the real you. It is not sinful. It is simply mistaken. It is an image in consciousness, a shadow on the screen of awareness. And the moment you recognize it as such, you begin to loosen the chains of suffering that have bound humankind from the beginning. There is a deeper I, a truer self, that has never feared, never lacked, never suffered, never died. That I has been silently present through every experience of your life, waiting to be acknowledged. And until we distinguish between the little I that masks and the great I am that is reality, we cannot take even the first step into spiritual freedom tonight. Let us be willing to look at this mask gently, lovingly, without judgment, and then let us be willing to set it aside long enough to let the light behind the mask shine through. Let us turn now to the name that stands at the center of all spiritual revelation, I am, and let us approach it with reverence. For when Moses stood trembling before the burning bush and asked, "What is thy name?" the answer given was not a doctrine, not a title, not a symbol crafted by human minds. The answer was being itself. I am that I am. In that moment, something eternal was spoken into time. And yet, my friends, the world has repeated these words for thousands of years without understanding what they reveal. They are not the name of a distant deity. They are not a poetic phrase to adorn scripture. They are the statement of the one and only life that is living itself as the infinite universe. I want you to hear this. When God says, I am, he is not describing a person. He is declaring the presence that is the life of all creation. And this is the great shock, the secret hidden in plain sight. The I that Moses heard is the same I that speaks through you when you say, I am. Not the little personal sense, not the ego identity, not the conditioned mind, but the silent, witnessing presence that is aware of every thought, every feeling, every breath, that I is God being expressing as your life. When Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he was not claiming a personal superiority. He was not pointing to a human identity. He was speaking out of that same divine I that had spoken to Moses. He was giving voice to the universal Christ consciousness, the I am, that lives as the heart of every being. And so when you read, I and the Father are one, understand this, the I that is one with the Father is not a Jewish man of 2,000 years ago. It is the divine presence announcing its unity with itself. Jesus simply recognized it. He did not possess it. He lived from it. This is the truth the world missed. There is only one I in all existence, one life, individualized as many, one consciousness, appearing as countless forms, one presence, wearing 1,000 masks of personality, yet unchanged behind them all. And so when you speak the words I am, you stand at the door of the Holy of Holies, whether you know it or not. If you attach those words to fear, I am afraid, you bury the Christ under the garment of the human sense. If you attach them to limitation, I am weak, I am sick, I am unworthy, you clothe infinite being in the rags of the mortal self. But when you pause, even for a breath, and let I am stand alone in silence, without description, without qualification, you are touching the living presence of God as your very self. Do you see the enormity of this? The name of God is your own name, stripped of all personal labels, free of all human claims. I am is who you are before a thought arises, before a feeling appears, before the world calls you by any identity. I am is pure, unclothed being. And so tonight we begin to set aside the heavy burden of believing that the human personality is the I that we are. We begin to sense, perhaps faintly at first, a deeper identity stirring beneath the surface. It does not shout. It does not boast. It simply is. It is the stillness behind thought, the silence behind the noise of the world, the presence that has never left you for a single instant. This is the I am that Moses heard, that Jesus revealed, that mystics of every age have recognized. And it is the I am that you must recognize, for it is the only self you have ever truly been. Now, having touched the simplicity and majesty of the true I am, let us look quietly at how the illusion of a separate I arose. For this is the root of every form of suffering known to mankind. And I ask you to listen with the same stillness with which we approach the name of God, because what we uncover here has nothing to do with guilt, nothing to do with personal failure. It is simply the story of how a shadow appears when attention turns away from the light. In the beginning, not a beginning in time, but a beginning in awareness, there existed only I am, pure being, pure consciousness, pure presence. There was no separation, no conflict, no fear, no other. But as consciousness began to behold its own expression, something subtle happened. Human sense arose. Human perception came into being. And with this human sense, there came the capacity to misinterpret what is seen. Just as a child, looking into a mirror, may imagine that the reflection is another person, so human consciousness mistook the reflection of life for a separate self. It saw a body and said, I am this. It experienced, thought, and said, I think. It felt emotion and said, this is me. In that very instant, the pure I am extended into the world of time and space, and the personal I was born. This personal I, this ego sense, is not an entity. It is a misunderstanding, a habit of attention. It is the moment when awareness, forgetting its divine source, identifies itself with a passing form, and from that misidentification came all the illusions of separation. Separation from God, separation from supply, separation from health, separation from love. You see, the moment the mind believes, I am a separate person, it must also believe, I must protect myself, I must secure my future, I must find love outside myself, I must earn my place in this world. And because this sense of self is rooted in fear, it creates a world in which fear appears justified. But understand this, the false I was never an act of rebellion. It was simply a forgetting, a forgetting of the truth that the I, which observes the limitation, is itself unlimited, a forgetting that the I, which witnesses the body, is not confined to the body, a forgetting that the I, which feels fear, is itself the presence before which fear dissolves. This forgetting produced the great illusion of separation, and from that illusion arose every form of suffering humanity has known, not because suffering is real, but because the one imagining itself to be a separate self must naturally experience the insecurity of separation. The shadow does not exist apart from the absence of light. And so, when you say, I am afraid, it is not the true I speaking, it is the mask. When you say, I am lacking, it is not the true I that lacks, it is the mistaken identification. When you say, I am not enough, the truth is that the infinite I am could never make such a statement. Only the shadow could. Do you see then that the so-called fall of man was never a moral failure? It was simply the birth of the false I, the belief in a self apart from God, and the entire spiritual path, as we experience it, is nothing more than the gentle return of attention from the mask back to the light behind the mask. This is why the mystics have always said, awake, thou that sleepest. We are not to awaken the ego. We are to awaken from it, awaken to that I am which has remained untouched, unsullied, untroubled, even while the human sense passed through the illusions of pain and pleasure, gain and loss in this hour. Let us, then, begin to understand that the false I was never an enemy. It was simply a misunderstanding, and misunderstandings dissolve not through struggle, not through condemnation, but through the recognition of the truth that was always present. Now that we have begun to discern the difference between the false I that imagines itself separate and the true I am that is the very presence of God, let us take another step, one that may appear simple, yet stands as one of the greatest transitions in spiritual life. It is the recognition contained in that profound statement, I of mine own self can do nothing. My friends, as long as the ego, the little sense of I, believes that it can achieve spiritual realization through effort, through willpower, through mental struggle, it remains trapped in its own illusion. For the ego cannot become spiritual. The personal self cannot climb into heaven. The human mind cannot think its way into truth. And yet, for so long we have tried. We have wrestled with problems, attempted to heal ourselves, attempted to reform our character, attempted to demonstrate supply, attempted to purify the mind or elevate the emotions, all in the belief that the personal I possessed the capacity to do so. But hear this, the personal I has no spiritual power, no healing power, no creative power, no intelligence of its own. It is not the actor. It is not the source. It is, at best, an instrument, at worst, an obstacle. The moment we imagine that the personal self can accomplish spiritual work, we slip into the ancient delusion of two powers, one power called God and another power called me. This is why Jesus, who lived in full consciousness of I am, said, I can of my own self do nothing. He was not belittling himself. He was revealing the secret of spiritual realization, the surrender of the personal doer. He was pointing to the truth that only the Father within, only the invisible presence acts, loves, heals, governs, sustains, and reveals. And so, when we say with the heart, not as a theory, not as a doctrine, but as an inner recognition, I of myself can do nothing. We are not speaking of failure. We are speaking of liberation. We are laying down the impossible burden of being our own savior. We are relinquishing the exhausting belief that life depends upon our personal effort. You see, the ego lives by effort. The spirit lives by grace. The ego strives to manage its world. The spirit simply is the world's substance. The ego attempts to fix conditions. The spirit reveals that conditions are shadows of belief. The ego tries to use truth as a tool. The spirit knows that truth is not used, it is realized. The moment we acknowledge, I can do nothing of myself, a profound shift begins within. We stop trying to use God. We stop attempting to pull the infinite into our finite concerns. We stop imagining that spiritual principles must be applied like techniques to manipulate outer circumstances. Instead, we rest, we listen, we become receptive. We allow the infinite I am to be itself as our very being. This is the end of the ego doer, not through force, not through the suppression of will, but through the simple recognition that there never was another power, never was another mind, never was another actor but the one. And as we cease our striving, as we make room for silence, something extraordinary happens. The inner activity of spirit begins to move, to guide, to reveal, to correct, to uplift, not as a response to our begging, but as the natural expression of its own nature. The greatest miracle in all spiritual work is this: the moment we stop trying to make something happen, the presence that has always been happening reveals itself. So let us understand, to say I can do nothing is not defeat. It is the doorway to the realization, the Father within me doeth the works, and that Father, the I am, is your own self, living its own life through you. When the mask of the ego doer is no longer insisting on its imaginary role, now that we have come to see that the personal I is not the actor and that the infinite invisible, the I am, is the only presence and power, the question naturally arises, how do we live this truth? How do we let this truth become experience rather than concept? And the answer, my friends, is not found in technique, nor in mental repetition, nor in effort. It is found in inner listening, in silent recognition, in the quiet opening of consciousness to the presence that already is. In the infinite way, we are not given formulas to use, for formulas belong to the realm of mind, and the mind cannot reveal spirit. We are not asked to affirm truth in order to force a change, because truth does not work through mental pressure. Instead, we are asked to do something far more simple and far more sacred, to turn within, frequently, gently, humbly, and acknowledge that I and the Father are one. This is the practice. It is not difficult, yet it requires sincerity. Many times a day, no matter where you are, no matter what you are doing, you pause for a few moments. Not long, a minute or two suffices, but in that minute you close your eyes to appearances, and you withdraw your attention from the clamor of the temporal kingdoms, and you turn toward the invisible. And in that inner turning, you make the quiet acknowledgement, thou art here, I am The place where I stand is holy ground. You are not declaring something to make it so, you are recognizing what already is. You are acknowledging the presence that has been the life of your life since before time began. Now, as you do this, resist the temptation to use truth for a purpose. Do not say, I will be still now so that my problem may be solved. That is the ego trying to employ God as a servant. No, you enter the silence for one reason only, because God is, because I am, because there is a presence here, and recognition of that presence is the highest prayer, the purest devotion, the greatest act of surrender. And in this stillness, you do not think, you do not wrestle with the mind, you do not try to silence the mind. You simply become receptive. If thoughts arise, let them pass like clouds across the sky of awareness. If feelings appear, let them come and go. You are not concerned with the activity of the mind. You are resting in that deeper consciousness which is not moved by thinking. Soon you will discover something remarkable beneath the noise of thought, beneath the changing landscape of emotion. There is an inner quiet, a subtle peace, a soft luminosity of awareness. This is the I am. This is the real self. And the more you turn toward it in these small moments throughout the day, the more familiar it becomes, not as an idea, but as a felt reality. This practice becomes, in time, a way of life. You do not meditate merely in the morning or the evening. You meditate in the grocery line, in the car, between tasks, before answering the telephone, before speaking to a loved one. You pause, you turn within, you acknowledge the presence, and you listen not for words, not for guidance, not for an answer, but simply for the assurance of being. And one day, quietly, without fanfare, something shifts. The silence begins to speak, not with sound, not with sentences, but with a knowing, a peace, a direction that arises spontaneously and carries its own authority. It may come as an intuition, a gentle nudge, a sudden clarity. You will know it not because it explains itself, but because it brings with it the fragrance of truth, the atmosphere of God. This is inner listening. This is the practice of the true I am. Not effort, not strain, not trying, but recognizing, consenting, allowing. And as this recognition deepens, you will find that life becomes guided from within. You will take no step without that inner sense of rightness. You will speak no word that does not rise from the quiet. You will cease to look to the outer world for validation, direction, or supply. You will discover that the kingdom of God is not attained, it is revealed. And that revelation comes in the stillness, where the I that thinks falls silent, and the I am that is eternal shines forth. This is the heart of spiritual practice in the infinite way, not the manipulation of truth, but the realization of presence, not the improvement of the human condition, but the recognition of the divine reality. And all of it begins with these small, persistent moments of turning within. As we continue our unfolding, there comes a moment, a sacred moment, when the inner practice begins to bear fruit. And this fruit is not something dramatic that appears in the outer world. It is not fireworks, not sudden miracles, not a thunderclap of revelation. No, it is something far more profound, a subtle shift in the way you speak to yourself within, in the way you identify yourself, in the way the word I is used in your consciousness. For centuries, you have taken every fleeting thought, every fear, every emotion, and claimed it as I. I am worried. I am angry. I am anxious. I am sick. And with those simple words, you have clothed the infinite in the garments of mortality. You have allowed the false self to steal the holy name. And every time the mask said, I am, and you believed it, the mask grew heavier. But once you begin this practice of turning within this gentle, frequent returning to the recognition of the presence, you start to notice something. You begin to see that the thoughts arising in your mind are not you. The emotions passing through you are not you. The sensations in the body are not you. You begin to sense that the true I is the one who witnesses them all. The stillness behind them, the awareness in which they appear and disappear. And so when fear arises, something new happens. Instead of tightening around it and saying, I am afraid, you pause. You look more deeply, and a quiet knowing arises. Fear is appearing. Yes, but the I that I am is not afraid. When the body feels pain, there is no denial, no resistance, but neither is there identification. You find yourself acknowledging the body feels pain, but I am is untouched. My essence is whole, inviolate, unconcerned. When the bank account is low, you become aware that lack is an appearance, a picture on the screen of sense, and inwardly a voice whispers, the supply I am is infinite. The figures in the world of form neither add to nor diminish my being. This is not wishful thinking. It is not positive affirmation. It is the dawning realization that the ego was never the I that you were. And as soon as that realization begins to take root, the power of the ego sense weakens. Its demands soften. Its fears lose their authority. Its judgments fall away. Relationships begin to change, not because you force yourself to love, but because you no longer approach others from the vantage point of a frightened self seeking security. You see the same I am shining through every face. You are no longer looking for love, because the I am is love itself. And in that recognition, you naturally become less defensive, less reactive, less concerned with being right, less wounded by the behavior of others. Time changes too. You realize that the eternal I am is never in a hurry, never late, never rushed. The sense of not enough time is recognized as part of the illusion of the little I. And as you stop calling that anxious voice I, a new rhythm appears, a rhythm of grace, of right action, of effortless timing. Even the body takes on a different meaning. You neither worship it nor despise it. You care for it as an instrument, a vehicle, but you no longer believe it is the seat of your life. You feel yourself as the awareness in which the body appears. And because you no longer identify with the body, its conditions no longer have the power to declare who you are. In every area of life, the same transformation occurs. The false I fades, and the true I am shines through. This change is not sudden. It is an unfoldment, a gradual awakening. But each time you refuse to give the name I to fear, to lack, to pain, to judgment, you break another link in the chain of illusion. And each time you acknowledge the presence, silently, gently, without force, you strengthen the awareness of your true identity. Do you see the beauty in this? You are not trying to make the ego better. You are not trying to perfect the mask. You are simply ceasing to call it I And when the false I is no longer believed, its power evaporates. What remains is what was always there, the pure, limitless, effortless I am. This, my friends, is the beginning of freedom. This is the beginning of living, not as a person striving for God, but as the transparency through which God lives his own life. And now, as this realization begins to take form within you, this recognition that the I you have carried for so long was never the true self, you will notice an even deeper shift, one that marks the beginning of spiritual adulthood. It is the dawning understanding that you are not here to accomplish life, to manage life, or to control life. You are here to yield to life, allowing the infinite invisible to live as you, through you, and in spite of you. This is the transition from living as a person to living as an instrument, from being the doer to being the transparency, from attempting to shape destiny to letting the inner Christ reveal the only destiny there has ever been. You see, the little I imagines it must plan and arrange, struggle and achieve, defend and acquire. It thinks it must determine outcomes and avoid dangers. It lives in a constant posture of self-preservation. But once you know, truly know, that the personal I is not the self, a tremendous burden drops away. You realize with absolute clarity, I do not live my life, life lives me. This is not passivity, it is receptivity. It is not laziness, it is surrender to the only power that exists. It is the recognition that the river does not push itself downhill. It flows, because flowing is its nature. The flower does not open by effort. It opens because opening is its nature. And the I am does not act through strain. It acts because effortless action is its nature. As this awareness matures, something beautiful occurs. Before speaking, you listen not to thoughts, but to the silence behind them. Before acting, you pause not to analyze, but to feel the subtle nudge of the presence. Before deciding, you rest not in human reasoning, but in the quiet certainty that the one mind is already forming its own perfect way. You cease to ask, "What should I do?" Instead, you ask, "What is the I am being here?" And in that question, you step aside, allowing the infinite to move. And you will discover this. When the inner presence is allowed to take the lead, everything unfolds with a rightness and timing that the human mind could never orchestrate. Conversations open at the precise moment they are needed. Guidance comes without strain. Solutions rise gently out of the silence, carrying with them a peace that confirms their origin. You begin to sense that life is not something happening to you, nor something you must create. It is something flowing through you. This is the meaning of the words. The Father within me, he doeth the works. The works are not yours. The intelligence is not yours. The inspiration is not yours. The love you feel for another is not your love. It is God, loving God. You are the avenue, the instrument, the transparency. And as this becomes your way of life, fear begins to vanish, not because you have conquered it, but because there is no longer a you to be afraid. Worry dissolves, not because you have solved every problem, but because the sense of being a separate problem solver has disappeared. Even the desire to control outcomes fades not through discipline, but because you have discovered that the outcomes arising from the infinite are always greater than anything the finite mind could have imagined. This is the secret. When the personal self stops trying to run the show. The divine self reveals that it has been running everything all along. And so, my friends, this stage of the journey is not the attainment of something new. It is the removal of the one thing that has obscured everything. The belief that you were the cause, as that belief dissolves, you find yourself living in a flow, a grace, a rhythm that requires no effort. You speak less, listen more, you hurry less, perceive more, you force less, trust more. And in that trusting, in that yielding, you come to understand why the masters have always taught that spiritual life is not lived by might, nor by power, nor by cleverness, but by spirit alone. When you rest in that spirit, when you allow the I am to be the only actor, your life becomes a quiet, unfolding harmony. You become, without intention or effort, a place where others sense peace. They may not know why. They may not be able to name it, but they will feel the presence shining through you as sunlight through a clean window. You become transparent, not as one who disappears, but as one through whom the infinite becomes visible. And now, as we bring this period of contemplation to its close, let us gather together the essence of what has unfolded in our midst, not as a summary for the mind, but as a recognition for the heart. For everything that has been spoken here has not been intended to inform you, but to remind you of what has always been true, waiting quietly beneath the noise of human belief. You have seen tonight that the name I am is not merely a sacred phrase from ancient scripture, nor a title bestowed upon a divine figure, but the very essence of your own being. You have glimpsed that the personal sense of I, the one that worries, suffers, fears, strives, was never the real self, but only a shadow cast upon the screen of consciousness by the belief in separation. You have felt, perhaps even faintly, that behind every thought, behind every emotion, behind every appearance, there stands a silent presence, unmoving, unchanging, untroubled. That presence is your true identity. It is the Christ of you. It is the I am that God declared to Moses, that Jesus revealed to the world, that mystics of every age have recognized in the depth of their inner stillness. And you have learned that the spiritual life is not lived through effort, nor through the manipulation of truth, nor through the attempt to improve the human self. It is lived through recognition, through surrender, through the gentle turning within again and again to acknowledge the presence that never leaves you, that lives you, that breathes you, that sustains you. My friends, if you will but return to this inner recognition many times a day, even for a moment, even for a breath, you will find that something begins to shift in your consciousness. The sense of being a separate doer will soften. The anxiety of personal responsibility will fade. The fear of conditions will diminish. And in their place will arise a quiet confidence, a peace that does not depend on circumstances, a trust that has no opposite. For as you come to live from the I am within you, you will discover that you are never alone, never unsupported, never at the mercy of the world. You will see that the same presence that guided Moses, that inspired the prophets, that illumined the Christ, is the very presence that walks with you as you in every moment of your existence. Let this, then, be your practice and your blessing. Turn within, be still, acknowledge the presence, listen. Not for words, not for signs, not for outcomes, but for the simple assurance that I am is here. For where the I am is recognized, the illusion of separation dissolves. Where the I am is known, fear cannot enter. Where the I am is lived, life reveals its divine rhythm. And you move, not as a struggling human being, but as a transparency for God. So go forth from this hour, not armed with methods, but clothed in awareness, not seeking to change the world, but willing to behold the world through the purity of the inner I am. Let every step be taken in quietness. Let every action arise from the center. Let every word be guided, not by thought, but by the presence that animates all things. And remember, you do not carry God with you. You are carried by God. You do not seek the I am. You are the I am. Recognize at last, rest in this truth. Live in this truth. Let this truth live you.